Hello? I'm going to tell you today a story that might change how you see reality. It's drawn from events most would rather stay silent about. So listen carefully. Episode 2. Footsteps in the Hall. Hook. Some nights, the hallway outside your door isn't part of the building anymore. They didn't speak for a long time after the door opened. The chain lay on the linoleum like a piece of jewelry someone had slipped off in a hurry, and the hall that wasn't their hall breathed in the way buildings breathe when they were once something else. Evelyn reached behind her, found the edge of the console table without looking, and steadied herself with the tips of her fingers. Her palm felt the nick she'd made in 1984, moving in that table from the dining room to the living room just to see. Life was full of just to see, and then somehow 30 years. Close it, she said again, softer now, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had a way of listening for tone. George eased the door in. As it settled, the wrong hallway narrowed to a slice. Lockers, buzzing tube, the endless, soundless silver thread from the drinking fountain. The latch caught with a modest click. The chain lay where it was. He lifted it, set it back across. The links felt damp, and when he looked down, he saw his palm had printed itself on the brass like a child's hand on a window. The boot prints remained, 3 small dark ovals leading from the threshold toward the radio. The radio, which was off, stared back dials like eyes that had seen too much and learned to keep it. Tea? Evelyn said and laughed at herself, a small bark, because there are impulses you keep no matter what dark dog sits at your door. He made tea because men like him make tea when the engine isn't turning over. Measure, pour, weight, the grammar of repair. He set the kettle on and rested his fingers on the old porcelain handle the way you rest your hand on a hood to feel the engine's story. Steam rose. They watched it like people watch their own breath on the coldest day of the year as assurance. The boot prints shone less. The chain dried where his fingers had been. The apartment remembered how to be an apartment. They took their cups to the couch and sat under the crocheted blanket yellows and oranges, the palette of the summer of '76 just touching knees. The television stayed black, the radio did not volunteer, the clock on the stove with its weary green digits moved in the slow heroic way clocks do when they know people are watching. "What did it say?" George asked finally. "Miss Eveline," she said, eyes on the door, "like Mr. Bothwell used to. Before I was married, before I was this." He wanted to say, "You're everything," but he knew how words could make promises that didn't fit in the air. He set his cup down, stood, and fetched the coffee tin of salt. Ruth had pressed into her hand that morning. He drew a new line across the threshold, careful even, like caulk. When he stood back, the white looked like winter. "It broke the line last night," Evelyn said. "So we make 2, he said, and drew a second line, an inch behind the first. The double white looked like a boundary a building might hesitate to cross. They slept only because bodies like theirs have schedules older than fear. They woke with the kind of jolt that doesn't move the limbs inside, a train breaking. The chain was where he'd left it. The salt lines were unbroken. But on the console table lay a folded piece of lined paper yellowed at the edges, a tear at the top where it had been ripped perfunctorily from a pad. Pencil, block letters, neat enough to be a teacher's but not hers. Miss Eveline, attendance required. Room 12 beneath, a list of names. Not in alphabetical order, not quite. Some were strange. Jerry Lynn Fincher, Reggie Budd, Sanders, Thomas C., illegible. 2 were not strange at all. George H. and Evelyn H. "I taught first grade," she said. "I never had a room 12. "They had room 12s at Lincoln," he said. She looked at him. He knew as soon as he'd said it. "Lincoln was where we met," she said softly. "Not in the building. At the football game. But that hallway was from Lincoln 1. My first job." There had been 3 Lincolns. The original brick building with the bell tower that had cracked in '58, the low-slung mid-century with ribbon windows and asbestos floors, the one with the cafeteria that smelled like peaches and bleach, and the modern rebuild from '88, all glass and square optimism, where they had brought their grandson for a winter concert once and watched a teacher in a scarf the color of lakes direct children as if directing weather. "Room 12, George repeated. "Second floor, east wing, faces the ball field." "Not the one I had," she said. "Mine faced the tennis courts. I could see the early bus loop around. The janitor would wave." "Lou," he said. "Louie." She smiled despite everything. Lou, who smelled like cigarettes and Murphy oil soap and fixed anything that agreed to be fixed and most things that didn't. He'd once rescued their lunchbox when Georgie left it by the radiator and the cheese had melted into an idea rather than a food. She unfolded the paper. On the back, in smaller letters, the date. Thursday, no month, no year, just Thursday, as if to say, whenever you get here, you're late. They did not burn the paper. You can throw something away when it comes from a junk drawer. You don't throw away a thing that crawled under your door. They placed it under the salt tin and let the weight of superstition keep it from moving. The day behaved like a day because that is how days are taught. George read the paper, then read the parts he knew again, as if reading could fix a world where it had become easier to break than to build. Evelyn dusted the baseboards because fear looks for corners to live in. Around noon, he took down the shoebox of recipes and found the card for chicken divan, even though there was no broccoli and what passed for cream in the fridge was a memory. He cooked something else, but used the same pan, the same care. They ate in the bright kitchen and chewed slowly the way old people do, not because they are old, but because they know how to take their time with what is good. After lunch, she dialed the number printed on the back page of the old Lincoln yearbook, the alumni office, knowing it would not work, knowing in her hands the phone had a weight it hadn't had yesterday. A recording said the number was no longer in service in a voice that sounded like it had never been in service. She hung up and wrote room 12 on an index card and propped it under the magnet on the fridge shaped like a watermelon wedge. "Ruth?" he asked. They went together. Ruth opened at the first knock in a sweater the color of dandelion leaves, hair pinned with the kind of clip that had outlived fashion and been rewarded with dignity. "You tell a thing you're coming," she said without greeting, "and it gives you a hallway. You show fear. It gives you a door." "You use my name," Evelyn said. "Not how I say it now." Ruth nodded, the way people nod at the weather. "Names are keys. It knocks with one and waits to see if you keep a spare." She put the kettle on and didn't turn the radio on. Ruth's radio only came on at 3 for the puzzle, and if the building wanted to listen earlier, it could buy its own. "We had a note," George said. "Attendance." Ruth's eyebrows rose. "Course you did. A school has to keep its books. Room 12, was it? East Wing. We had polio clinics there in 61, the old building, then moved them because Mrs. Crandall's boy fainted and hit his head on the heater, and his mama said the building had a jealousy for children. She poured tea, sniffed it, poured a new one because she didn't like the first attitude. "How do we not go?" Evelyn asked, "and when a door we didn't want opens?" "You don't," Ruth said simply. "You go, you make a list of what you're taking, and you leave the rest. You hold hands. You don't learn anything the hallway offers for free. You do not drink the water, and for the love of God and the gas bill, you do not turn on lights you didn't turn off." Evelyn took this in the way she had taken other impossible instructions in other decades. "Put the baby in the bassinet and sleep while you can. Don't answer the phone after midnight. Say you're not home when the man from the bank comes. Rules for surviving eras that hadn't asked your opinion first." "Lou," George said, "do you remember? Did Lou ever see things?" Ruth supplied. "He used to leave the mop standing in the middle of the hall and say, 'Ruthie, I gotta leave it right there or it'll bleed the shine clear to the gym.' He knew where not to mop. He wasn't afraid exactly. He was respectful of what wasn't his. Died in 87. Heart, in the boiler room, like a gentleman." She smiled, sad, at some picture only she could see. "He used to carry a roll of masking tape and cover the peephole from the outside if he felt the hall getting nosy. You might do that, just for the hours between midnight and dawn." They went home with tape and tricks and the dignity that comes from being given a task a person can do with their hands. Afternoon slid into evening with the west-facing windows offering the kind of orange that makes even ductwork look holy. George taped the peephole from the hall side, bravely whistling like a man who knew who he was. On the step in the open, the runner rug under his shoes worn down to its weave by 40 years of neighbors. He felt ridiculous and more himself than he had in weeks, both at once. He drew 2 lines of salt this time, then a third. 3 white ribs across the sill. The night's breath would have to be very ambitious to get over 3. They ate soup. He sprinkled pepper the way his father had, wrist loose, gentle rain over a farm. They watched the news without hearing it. In weather, a map showed their town bleeding blue into the counties around it. Snow upstate, rain downtown, a little white line for wind. At 8, he got up and turned the set off because sometimes a picture is an insult when the room is doing its own show. They played gin rummy because cards are conversation that doesn't require opinions. He lost 3 hands in a row because he was thinking about locker numbers. She lost 2 because she was thinking about seating charts. They laughed after each loss like winners. At 10, she washed her face at the sink, looking at herself in the old foxed mirror with its small freckles where the silver had gone to seed. She saw, just for a pulse, the younger Evelyn there behind the older one, the way you see 2 exposures on a poorly developed photo, and the younger had a look in her eyes she had not seen on that face before. Hunger, loneliness, not for food or company, but for a stretch of life that might still be wide enough. She turned the tap off and listened. Somewhere not in their apartment and not far, a drinking fountain sighed. "Attendance," she said to the mirror without meaning to, and the mirror did not fog, though her breath was warm. They piled pillows, adjusted the mattress, the fixed liturgy of bodies negotiating with springs. He put the flashlight under his pillow because he understood his hands in the dark and did not trust them in the light of someone else's decision. She slid Ruth's steak knife underneath hers because the world had made her prudent. They did not speak the words good night. They let sleep take them by the collars, and it did, with an old cat's patience. He was in the auditorium. The chairs were the old ones, brown, wood seats that flipped up hard enough to bruise a thigh, metal frames that still smelled like coal gas, as if heat remembered itself better than bodies could. The stage curtain hung heavy, the green gone black in the rigging. On stage, the chair. The same chair, twine on the rung, the tag with his careful block letters, album 1970-1979, but the album was not there. A roll book lay on the seat, the binder a teacher snaps with one hand when the room needs to know who is in charge. The cover was that institutional green he remembered from army forms. On the top, stamped in a blue that had once been bold, Lincoln, room 12. His feet did what feet do in dreams when the path has been laid. He mounted the stage steps and touched the roll book, cold, damp, not wet, like the outside pocket of a coat worn in a light snow. He opened it. The pages were not blank, names in pencil, neat, strong, some crossed out with a single line, others circled twice. A handful were written a second time, lower down where a substitute might have made a new list. And there, mid-page, two names that broke him into younger pieces, Evelyn H. George H. He lifted his head and saw that the house was not empty. Children sat here and there, scattered like chess pieces at the end of a game. A boy in the fourth row in a striped shirt, swinging one leg and trying to stop. A girl up near the back, face in her arms, hair like the wheat fields they had driven past 40 years ago. A small one down front, feet not touching the floor, in boots that looked damp. Attendance, the small one said without looking up. He tried to speak. His tongue would not be a part of this. A door at the back of the house opened. The little rectangle of hall light spill made a shape on the floor he knew down to the shadow's edge. The hall from their building. The one outside their door, not the dream hall, their hall. Out of that rectangle of light, a woman stepped, closing the door behind her as if she knew how not to disturb. Evelyn, her, not the young one, not the one with driftwood hair, but the one who knew which saucepan could handle tomato, and which would complain. Her mouth had a little line of humor on one side that life had given as a tip. "You're late," she told him, and the way she said it, no judgment, just fact, seated him in the auditorium of the years they had tried to not waste. He saw then that every child's face had something wrong with it. Not monstrous, not demon. Wrong like a photograph developed in a chemical bath that had been used too many times. Too pale at the edges, the eyes a little too flat, or more terrible, too deep, as if the paper had a second surface behind it. He turned to the roll book. A pen lay in the gutter. He did not remember picking it up. His hand wrote a check mark next to Evelyn H. The check was perfect, his old mechanic's hand that had once drawn engine diagrams for boys who wanted to learn without being seen to learn. When he looked up, the auditorium was gone. He stood in the hallway between rooms 10 and 12. The lockers waited, beige, patient, the padlocks like little mouths. The drinking fountain sent up that thin silver that made no sound as it left or hit. The floor was the color of soap. He read the placards above the door frames. Room 10, room 11, room 12, attendance required. He could have woken himself, he thought later. He could have willed his eyes to peel back to their world. Instead, he reached out and put his hand on the cool rectangle of room 12's door glass and looked in. The room was set for day, desks in pairs, a clock at the front with hands that might tell time if asked politely, the American flag, corner a little drooped as if bored, coat hooks with 3 small coats. Sunlight came in at the wrong angle and did not move. At the teacher's desk, old metal with gum museumed underneath, lay the album. The album from their closet, damp at the edges, labeled, waiting for whoever kept books here. He put his fingers to the door. The knob turned easily, old-school steel that had been made to be used by thousands of hands for decades. The hinges lifted their shoulders and did not complain. "George," Evelyn said, and he realized she had been beside him the whole time, that his dream had been theirs again like the first night. Her mouth was tight with a love that had outlived being kind. "Don't!" He opened the door. They did not step over any line they could see. They stood on a threshold as polite as any schoolrooms. The room was empty. It had the smell of chalk in the eraser, of pencil shavings, of a radiator turned off for summer, and under all that gym floor polish, old paper, the iron of water that does not quite know where to go. Evelyn walked slow between the desks like a teacher counting heads. She did not trust to sit still. On the back wall, above a row of construction paper turkeys, hung a bulletin board covered with photographs, Thanksgiving pageants, a map of the county with yarn looping to towns, a picture of the stone steps out front where classes sat for group photos. In one photo, 2 figures stood at the edge, a little out of frame. Their faces had been torn off by time or small fingers picking. The clothing, though, the suit jacket on him, the green sweater on her. recognizable like the smell of your own house after 3 weeks away. She did not reach for that. She went to the desk, to the album. A film of moisture glossed the cardboard the way sweat glosses a man trying not to show he is running. The twine tag lay across it. Album 1970, 1979. She touched the corner, only the corner, like she was a chemist with a new acid, and opened it to the first page. The summer of 73 at the lake, their blanket like a flag for a country that had done its best. The photo did not look like a photo. It looked like the moment itself. Her hair lifted in the breeze, his hand on the cooler, the polka dot paper cups, a sun that is gone now but was once everywhere. She flipped. The motel in Indiana with the neon SLEP because the steelworker's son had taken a pellet to the E. Another flip, another motel, the record store where they stood arguing Otis versus Sam in the most polite war in history. Flip, flip. Then the photographs began to show rooms that did not exist. Their apartment, but with a second hall that went nowhere, a closet with 6 coats when they had 5, a child's small rain boots against their radiator, a door, not the front door, labeled Room 12. Enough, George said, but his voice cracked, and the word came out like a branch breaking under snow. She closed the album and set her hand on it, the way you put a hand on a beehive to tell the bees you mean respect. Behind them, the classroom door whispered shut. They turned together. The knob turned of its own accord. The latch clicked. Someone in the hall walked past at the pace of a late bell. Not running, but fast enough to be forgiven. The footsteps faded. Listen, she said. They listened. The building spoke the language of old buildings, pipes telling secrets, air settling, the small animal scurry of dust. And under all that, from somewhere impossible, a radio, the low, velvet-voiced kind from evenings in 79 telling people to keep their hands on the wheel in the snow to come. Welcome back, the voice said. She tried the knob. It turned. The door opened. The hall was gray, empty, its lights buzzing their little metal prayers. Out they went, 2 figures in a world that had once been busy with the business of making new lives. The sign for Room 12 hung slightly crooked, as if a teacher had bumped it with a stack of workbooks and said bad words under her breath and meant them only for herself. They reached the drinking fountain. Evelyn looked at the thin silver thread. It made no sound. The bowl was dry, no splash, no overflow. The water fell to a place that was not there and did not gather. Don't, he said. I know, she said, and then, unexpected even to herself, she reached out and put her forefinger into the stream. It was not wet. It felt like cool glass, held over a breeze. She drew her finger back. A small oval of dark remained on her skin like a bruise that hadn't decided to bloom yet. She wiped it on the hip of her nightgown, and the dark did not come away. The bell rang. They had forgotten school bells, how large they are inside a person. The note did not end so much as become the hall itself. Doors opened down the length of the corridor. Not much. An inch? 2? Enough for eyes to look, enough for small hands to push attendance slips into the hall. From room 10 came a folded triangle of paper. From room 11, another. From room 12, none. Go, she said, and he did not argue because sometimes a marriage is a relay race, and you pass the baton without looking. They crossed the threshold of the wrong hallway and into their own building's hall because the building had decided to be practical for a moment. The runner rug ran obediently to the stair. Ruth's door stood with its chain across. The exit, at the end, glowed the kind of red that thinks it's doing a favor. On their mat, a new slip of paper waited. Miss Evelyn, tardy, detention, under it, in small handwriting like a child's trying to be precise. Room 12 never ends. Morning looked at them with pity. He made coffee with hands that had learned not to shake when it mattered. She buttered toast and cut it diagonally because triangles are kinder to old mouths. The index card on the fridge read, Room 12 in her tidy teacher script. The bruised dark oval on her finger had not changed. Hospital? He said. And say what? She said. Doctor, my dream water left a mark? She kissed his cheek instead of arguing further and tasted salt. He had salted the threshold again at 4 when the apartment tilted in his sleep, and he dreamed the building had put on skates. At 10, their son called, a miracle of long distance that still felt like magic, even after 30 years of long distances. She did not tell him about room 12. He told her about the leak under his sink, the way the rental man had shrugged with a competence that guaranteed at least one more visit. She made the sounds mothers make for problems they cannot fix or pay to fix, and asked about the grandchildren's spelling bees, and pretended she had not nearly stepped into a hallway that had missed them on purpose. After, she took down the dictionary because somewhere in her mind a string had been tied to a word and tugged. Detention, the act of detaining, the state of being detained, a place where children sit and look at the floor between 3 and 4 in the afternoon because they have tidied their hair too slowly or looked out the window like birds. What happens if we don't go? She asked the room. The room did not answer. At 2, the radiator in the bedroom exhaled heat in a sigh and then did not. In the silence after, she heard heels in the hall outside their door. Click, click, click. Not her pace, not hers now, hers then, someone else wearing her feet. The heels stopped outside their door. A piece of paper slid under. The handwriting, bigger now, rushed. Miss Evelyn, bring the album. She opened the hall closet. The chain pulled. The light turned on without being asked. The top shelf looked like a topography she knew better than any map. The album sat exactly where it sat. She did not touch it. She closed the door. The light went out with a small private sigh. Ruth, she said. They went again. Ruth, who had lived long enough to have given names to things that didn't deserve them, heard them without interrupting. Poured coffee this time because some afternoons require staying awake on purpose. You can go around a thing, Ruth said, or you can go through it. You two have been going around for years. Nice, slow circles, bake sales, knees, the world taking people and leaving only their kitchen chairs. Sometimes a place will take the circle away and make you walk the line. I don't know what that means, Evelyn said, not unkind. It means if it wants you to bring the book, you bring a book, but don't bring yours. Bring a book that looks like yours, old cover, right weight, stones inside if you have to. You carry what looks right, and you keep what is right. George nodded. You've been doing this long? Ruth smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't show teeth but does show history. Since Mr. Louis left, someone has to read the building its bedtime stories. They went home and did the small, subversive work that keeps old things from thinking they have the right to everything. He wrapped a phone book yellowed, an artifact already inside an old brown pillowcase. She stitched the pillowcase into the album's old storage sleeve, the one she had made in '92 when the closet had developed a damp insistence. The result looked like a thing that would be satisfied by being carried. He put the real album in a plastic tub with a tight lid and slid it under the bed. He taped the lid for good measure, not because tape stops dreams, but because sometimes it does. At 3:45, the air changed. They felt it the way people feel weather inside bones that used to be young. The building took a breath and held it. Now, she said, they stood by the door with the fake album in his hands. She reached, lifted the chain, pulled the door inward, and the hall showed them its dream face. Lockers, light, fountain, all of it patient as a clerk. Behind glass, they stepped over the triple salt and into another century. Room 12 waited. They walked the corridor the way you walk a hospital at night when you're not family, but you have been told you can sit anyway. The drinking fountain hissed politely. The bulletin board outside room 11 had a construction paper turkey, with feathers cut out from maps Toledo, Des Moines, Duluth pasted backward so the interstates crossed its tail. The door to room 12 was open. It had never been opened before. The room beyond breathed the breath of old paper, desks in pairs, coats that hung with small authority. The clock at the front, 2:58, though it was nearly 4 by any reasonable measure. On the teacher's desk lay a roll book, and beside it, empty space the size of the album. Lay it down, she said. He set the fake carefully, adjusted the corners so the cloth lay flat. The desk took the weight the way a hand takes a bird that is willing to be held. Attendance, a voice said. Not in the hall, not in the room, in the air, surrounded by little strains and shifts the way a building thinks. She lifted the roll book. Her hands knew what to do. Evelyn H., present. George H., present. Others absent, absent, absent. She did not say the names. She looked at the door. No children came in. She looked at the windows. The field beyond stood in a wind that did not touch the trees beside the window. Detention, the voice said, but softer, weary, less sure now that someone had played by rules it could not see. She closed the roll book. The page she had opened to had been blank when she lifted it. Now it held 24 names written in the strong pencil of a day that never happened. Next to her name, a check. Next to his, a check. Next to other circles, some doubled, some crossed. She did not investigate which. Leave it, she said, and they both knew she meant the fake. They each took a side of the desk and lifted it a whisper to set it back down as if moving a sleeping infant into a crib. They backed to the door together, not turning their backs. There are ways to leave rooms that are polite. They left politely. The corridor took them. The drinking fountain did not splash. The lockers did not groan. The light hummed in a key that might have been B-flat or might have been hunger. They stepped through the threshold, onto their runner rug, into their building's hall. The door behind them closed with a respectful sound like a book shut mid-sentence to save the place. He dropped the chain. She drew the second and third salt lines tighter with the heel of her hand as if salt could be pressed into work. They stood, hearts doing the old hurt that isn't exactly hurt, and waited for something to object. Nothing did. They made tea. They did not discuss whether that had been wise. At dusk, the building paid them a compliment by creaking only in the ways it had in Uru 1221. He turned on the radio to their station, and a show came on about Billie Holiday, and a man with a kind, practiced voice told a story about a night in Newark in 1957 and how the club smelled like cigarettes and sugar. Their apartment smelled like tea and dust and safety. Maybe that was all, he said. And maybe we fed it, she said. And this was not a correction but a kindness, to keep a mind's muscle from cramping. They slept. They did not dream. The knock came at 5:30 in the morning, the blue hour when buses decide whether they will run, and newsboys used to get their fingers dirty. They woke not with their usual mutual grunt, but with open eyes, sitting as if the bed had pushed them up like a wave puts up stones. "Ruth?" he said. They waited. The peephole was still taped. He went to the door, stood aside like a man who had made more decisions at thresholds than anywhere else. "Who is it?" Evelyn asked through the wood. Silence, then paper slid under. He picked it up. The same lined yellow, the same block letters. Not as neat. "You brought the wrong one." A second slip followed. "Bring the right one or we'll come take it." He looked at her. She nodded. "We don't." It wasn't a question. They taped the slip to the inside of the door because sometimes you pin a threat on the refrigerator and let it look at you while you cook. "What does it do with it?" he asked. "That it can't do with a phone book in a coat?" "Remember," she said. "Or pretend to. Or teach. I don't know. It wants us as we were, and as we might have been, and it wants proof that it can keep," he said. She put her hand on his cheek and felt the bristle he had missed to the right of his jawbone, the place where razors fail and women notice. "I am not proof," she said. "I am here." He laughed, a sound that had the shaky courage of a person standing on a dock on the first day of summer and pretending the water is not cold. They did not make a plan beyond "do not bring the real one." Sometimes a plan is an insult to what you're up against. All day the building was good. They ran the vacuum. He oiled the hinge on the bathroom door and asked it to behave. She found a jar of buttons and sorted for no reason but that buttons deserve their piece of order. At noon, Ruth knocked with lemon bars, left them, and did not stay because she understood the holiness of certain days. The sun went down later than it had any business doing in November, and they watched the light reach too far into the room like a boy who doesn't know where to stop. At 9, the radio a trader crackled and cleared its throat. Music didn't come out. A voice did, a child trying to sound like an adult and mastering authority through repetition. "Miss Evelyn," it said, "in attendance." She turned the radio off. The radio turned itself back on. "Room 12, the voice said, with a whisper at the edges like water finding its level. He unplugged the radio. The radio sang one bar of something old and then died with a patient, offended hiss. He taped the cord to the wall like a parent. She watched him with the love you have for a man who tapes things to walls. They went to bed in their clothes because if the building wanted to take them in nightgowns, it could at least put in the work. Sleep did not come because something else did. A smell. Floor wax, chalk, sawdust, used for vomit. The scent of 1,000 Fridays gelled into a single Friday. The room graded itself into a corridor. The radiator traded itself for a locker. The nightlight learned to hum. He sat up. She sat up. "Don't move," she said. The hall came to them like a tide does, and their bed floated on it. Locker doors yawned open with polite clicks. Sheet metal whispered. The drinking fountain, though there was no fountain, sent up its endless narrow. Across the room, no longer a room, not theirs, stood a figure with its back to them. Not tall, round-toed boots. You could hear the wet in them as they moved. It lifted an arm and wrote on the chalkboard that was their bedroom wall in slow, careful capitals. "Bring the right one." The chalk squeaked once and apologized. It put the chalk back in the tray, a child's hand, small and definite. The hand hung at its side the way a hand hangs when it is done doing what it was told. Evelyn stood. She didn't know why. "You stand when you're called in certain tones." She went to the board. She picked up the eraser. It was not an eraser. It was their wedding veil, folded square, perfectly white after all these years. She pressed it to the words and cleared them because sometimes the only way to keep a thing from being true is to put your hands on it until it loses focus. Under the veil, the chalk had written a second line, fainter, smaller, as if captured words were bleeding through. "Room 12 never ends." She set the veil down and felt the room, if this was a room, close around her like a fist. George moved without deciding to and put himself between her and the not-child, between her and the board, between her and as much as he could. The not-child turned. Where its face should have been was not a face. It was their front door. The peephole taped, the brass handle, the 3 salt lines with a little gap in the middle where a finger had been drawn through, the chain down, and in the peephole's black, his own eye looking back at them. He shouted without sound. He reached for the not-child because he could fix a carburetor, a leaking seal, a noise from a wheel you only heard when you turned left. He could fix this if he could touch it. The figure stepped back. The floor under its boots rang like stage. He grabbed for it, and his hand met wood, the classroom door. His palm hit room 12. Cold, solid. The handle turned itself and came off in his hand like a bad joke. Evelyn took his free hand, the one not holding the stupid metal knob, and squeezed, and he remembered then to live. "Wake up," she said. He felt the narrowest of choices, like the difference between a misstep and a fall. He woke. The knob was on the floor between their bed and the dresser, not their knob. Old-school steel, round, heavy, with a square shaft like a spine. The imprint of his hand in dust showed exactly where he had held it. They sat on the bed and watched the knob until it didn't make sense to watch it anymore. "Lou," he said. "Lou," she repeated and smiled without humor. He'd know what to do. "He taped the peephole," George said. "We did," she said. He stood, knees a little sour, spine a little sand, and crossed to the door. The tape was there. The tape had been lifted and put back, clean and even, no torn corners, no wrinkles. Someone had taught the hall how to tape politely. He pulled it off and looked out. The building's hall was itself. Runner rug, Ruth's door with its wreath woven from old Christmas cards, the exit light with a dead fly in it like a fossil that had died of disappointment. No lockers, no fountain, no light that thought it was better than people. On the mat outside their door lay another paper. "Bring the right one tonight," underneath. Smaller. "Class begins at 3 UU. He looked at the stove clock, 5:48. He looked at his wife. She looked back, hand on her heart, and all their years in between. "Okay," he said. "We'll bring it." "No," she said, and he loved her for not asking what he meant. "We'll bring it," he repeated, and opened the hall closet. He lifted the plastic tub from under the bed and set it on the console table. He cut the tape, lifted the lid, the album dumb, ordinary, heavier than fear. He set it down beside the fake. Then he set the fake on top of the reel and wrapped both together with twine until the bundle looked like something you would carry through a rain if you loved what was inside. "What are we doing?" she said. "Bringing it," he said. "And not?" At 2:55, the air pressed down on the apartment the way air does before a storm. The radio cleared its throat and did not ask to speak. The salt glittered on the threshold like a road map of winter. They stood at the door. He carried the bundle like a baby. She held nothing. She needed both her hands for the door and for him. She opened. The wrong hall had been waiting. It made no secret of this. The drinking fountain stood up straight like a child promised a star. Room 12 glowed at the end of the corridor with a kind of light that had nothing to do with electricity. The bell began to ring, polite this time. She felt the muscles in her legs remember how to walk when they had worn a skirt that insisted on a certain distance from a certain kind of ankle. They went. Inside room 12, the air was cool and segmented, as if it had been laid down in rectangles by men with lunch pails. The teacher's desk waited for the weight of the bundle. He set it down, untied the twine, lifted the fake, and set it quietly to the side. The real album weight of 49 years of paper and light lay on the metal like a heart. Damp came up, unfelt, from the desk and kissed the cardboard. "Attendance," the air said, and she took the roll book and checked her name and his, hand steady, and did not check any others. "Detention," the air said, more sadly than before. She took the fake, placed it beside the reel, and closed the albums, cover gentle, the way you close a coffin, if you are the last person who touched the face inside while it was still interested in birthdays. They backed away. They left the room politely, the way you leave faith when faith has decided to stay and you have not. At the door she paused. The bulletin board on the back wall, photographs of children with turkeys, of teachers with hair like good mothers, had a new picture. George standing at the sink in their kitchen this morning washing their 2 cups. His shoulder blades made an old man's map under his T-shirt. In the picture, a small round-toed boot print on the floor behind him, already fading. "Don't," he said, and she did not. They stepped into the hall, and the hall let them go as though hands had opened. They were home before they knew they were, because sometimes home is a trick of speed and gratitude. He set the fake on the console. He set the reel on the floor. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and they listened. Nothing. He laughed like a man who doesn't trust his own jokes. They made tea. They sat. She pressed her thumb absent-mindedly to the bruise oval on her finger. It had lightened, as if the classroom had taken back its mark. At 4:39, the building sighed and put the smell of old chalk away. They slept. The knock woke them at midnight, single, patient. He went to the door and did not ask who, because this was not a who night. He opened. The hall was their hall, the one that knew their arthritis and their holiday habits. Ruth's wreath slept. The exit sign did its best. On the mat, not paper. A small boot, round-toed, damp, perfectly placed so that the toe pointed toward their living room. Inside the boot, the roll book from room 12. On the roll book, the teacher's pen. Next to the pen, a single Polaroid that had not existed and now did. Evelyn standing in room 12 at that first desk job of hers, young, head bent over a seating chart, lips caught half laugh at something someone had said. Perhaps Lou, perhaps a child saying a word wrong in a way the whole century would want to write down. He lifted the roll book with both hands, and the book made the sound of pages shifting somewhere between paper and skin. He brought it in. He set it on the table. She stood over it because the book had the feeling of something that would open itself if not watched. "Don't," he began. "I know," she said. The roll book opened. The pages turned. The book stopped. The page where her name and his had been checked looked up at them. The pencil marks thickened without a hand to do it. Two squares drew themselves in the margin beside their names. One read, Room 12. One read, Home. Between the squares, a line sketched itself in a slow, patient way, as if the pencil were thinking with each inch, do we connect them or do we not? The line stopped an inch shy of touching. It left a white breath between the ends. The radio murmured like a man waking. "Miss Evelyn," the soft voice said, very close, very kind, "stay after." The chain unhooked itself. The salt line shifted the way snow shifts when something small walks across it and decides not to be seen. The lights dimmed, not off, dimmed, as through the air itself had grown thicker, and from down the hall that used to have a bathroom and now had other ideas. Footsteps approached at the pace of a woman who has decided what she will say when she gets there. Evelyn took George's hand under the table edge the way she had in '74, when the bank had sent that letter and he'd wanted to die and instead learned to bargain. "Whatever comes in," she said, and her voice was low and clear, "we call it by our names." "What if it uses ours?" and he asked. "Then we say them first," she said. The footsteps stopped just beyond the spill of their lamplight. A voice they knew and did not know said, almost apologetic, "Miss Evelyn, attendance?" They did not answer. They did not refuse. The roll-book page turned without fingers to a blank spread. The pen rolled toward her wrist like a cat. She did not pick it up. The pen lifted, wrote Eveline H. in a present and George H. present in her old neat hand. And then, under those names, slower, careful, as if someone were learning to write on a moving bus, a third line, Room 12, present. The lamp blinked. Not out. Once, like an eye surprised to see itself. The footsteps advanced one step, two. The door that had been closed since they closed it, and had taped the peephole, and had salted, and had drawn 3 lines, and had made tea, and had played gin, and had listened to love for decades, opened. Polite, 2 inches. The hall beyond it, not their hall, not the school's hall, something in between, exhaled. A small boot appeared in the gap. Damp, patient, then a second. A hand took the edge of the door and pushed it wider with the careful authority of a child allowed to come late because her mother works nights. "Miss Evelyn," said the voice very near, "you forgot to take the rest." Evelyn stood. She did not step forward. She did not step back. "What rest?" she asked. The not child lifted its face, and where the face had been, a door, there was now something else, a wall of photographs. Not hung, not framed, laid edge to edge the way people used to paste pictures in big books, corners at corners building a life out of paper, her father squinting in a July sun. George's mother stirring a pot with a spoon that was also a weapon. A summer Sunday dress with a grass stain, the Ben Franklin housecoat, the windshield at dusk, smeared with bugs and hope. "You forgot these," the voice said, and there was a loneliness in it so clean it made the room taller. George reached for the album. "Not that one," the voice said, almost sad. "The other one." "What other?" Evelyn began, and then she knew. "There is no other." She lied to the hall, because sometimes lying is a form of loyalty. The photographs on the not face rippled like fish when a hand reaches into the water. One lifted, peeled itself away from the rest, floated toward her like a leaf. It was the photo of Room 12 from that bulletin board, her, young, laugh-caught mid-breath, chalk on her fingers. It landed face up on the table beside the roll book. It looked true. It felt true. It might have been true. She pressed her finger on its edge, and the bruise oval she had carried went suddenly cold and then was gone. "Miss Evelyn," the voice whispered, "stay after." The clock on the stove said 12:03. The clock in room 12, which was not there and very much here, said 3:02. The line between the squares on the roll book drew itself the last inch and touched. The lights went out. They heard the classroom chairs scrape. They smelled floor wax. They felt the old wood floor rise under their slippers where the carpet should be. "George," she said, and her hand found him, and his hand found her, and the not child took another step into their apartment, and the doorway behind it stretched taller, longer, like a mouth that had remembered how to eat. From somewhere deep in that long, long hall a bell rang. To be continued in episode 3, Room 12.